everyone, and welcome to Black Space Live. I'm your host, George Middleton. Today, we are going to conduct the third step in our series called the Collective Political Power Assessment. Step one in this process was determining our community's top 3 political goals. Step 2 was assessing our top strengths as a racial demographic. Now for step 3. But before we get into the meat of the issues and this great discussion, I want to introduce this dynamic panel who's been taking all the bumps and all the hits with me, because I am a novice at this and I have been making all kinds of rookie mistakes. Nathaniel is probably going to fire me after this one. So I'll start off with myself, and then I'll let the rest of this esteemed panel just say a few minutes for who they are. I'm George Middleton. I am a therapist, mentor, musician, and I'm also an author promoting a series of works addressing the connection between the mental health, the state of our mental health, and race ideology. Let's start with the Queen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivo Jackson. I am a small business technology consultant in Grand Rapids, Michigan, originally from Detroit. I am still a native Detroiter, so I always take every opportunity to claim Detroit whenever I can.
Daniel?
Good evening all. Daniel Williams, residing down here in sunny South Florida, business development executive for a small digital marketing agency. And if Ivo is going to be claiming Detroit, then I would be the answer to the question, is Brooklyn in the house?
Bobby?
Pleasantries, everybody. Happy hump day. I'm Bobby Drake, also reporting to you live from sunshiny South Florida, 305. I am an IT technician, an educator, and a lifelong student.
And Penny.
Man, we got a lot of Florida in the building. I'm Central Florida, the same part of the state. No offense, brothers. Make it sound fancy. I am an entrepreneur. But I'm also an aviator in training. I think that sounds a lot better.
Just a renaissance man.
Yeah, and I'm a former lobbyist too.
And that's why I
call hold that against
politics. Huh?
We won't hold that against you.
I apologize in advance.
That's why I call you all world. Hey, I think I got my screen sharing back again, so I'm going to try to pick up where we left off on that. So as I said, can everybody see that?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So as I said, this is part 3. And we are going to do a brainstorming session on to try to come up with 3 top strategies politically not tried before in moving our community forward. And if you notice, I want to set the mental template here with this very overused cliche, but hey, I think it's appropriate. And then I had one other little statement that sometimes perfectly describes the situation in our community. Don't you hate it when you have to kill somebody all over again? I think that's the Queen's part of her motto. That's why she phrases, "I ain't going back and forth with you."
That's right. I'm not going to kill them. Correct.
So we're going to get into we're going to brainstorm some solutions, guys. And for those who aren't familiar with brainstorming is proposing new ideas, a free-flowing exchange of ideas. There's no judgment of ideas. We're not necessarily making decisions. Everything's up on the table for consideration. And we build on those. It's okay to be funny. We want to be as creative as possible. And, I like to take notes, so that's what I'll be doing.
Awesome.
All right?
I'm prepared for that too.
Oh, that's right. You're very good at that. So with that in mind, let me read one little piece to kick this off, and then we'll get started. We'll roll this out. This article is just a little blurb, addresses our past and probably current way of addressing our community issues. It's titled Civil Rights Movement Tactics. The civil rights movement utilized a range of tactics to address different problems. For example, nonviolent direct action was critical in challenging segregation in public accommodations. Direct action disrupted the status quo and made it difficult for those in power to ignore the issue of segregation. The best examples are the sit-ins and freedom rides. In some cases, the sit-ins led to immediate changes in local policy, and widespread direct action protests eventually led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned segregation in public accommodations. The freedom rides forced the Kennedy administration and the FCC to actually enforce two Supreme Court decisions regarding interstate travel that were being ignored by white Southerners. However, direct action was not particularly effective for addressing the denial of voting rights. To tackle this, the SNCC organizers and their local allies used the much less visible approach of canvassing, going door to door, meeting and talking to people. They built relationships, gave people a chance to practice voting applications, and provided transportation and support for those ready to try. All of this work was slow, painstaking, and initially had a few tangible successes until the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Even when people tried to register, they were most often rejected and had little recourse. So just wanted to kind of give that little historic perspective over our typical ways of trying to hit solutions. So from this point on, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to call on the Queen first to let her start it off, and then we'll move from there.
Okay, when we talk about what we should be doing politically that we have not done before, I think that the first thing we ought to address is our approach. Historically, we have approached the topic of justice and the issue of politics from a moral perspective or a moral standpoint. And I think that's problematic at this point. I think we need to look at justice and politics from an economic standpoint, and pushing ideas of morality. Not only is it outdated, not that the morality itself is outdated, but it's just always been a problematic approach, because people who were willing to enslave and buy and sell other human beings clearly cannot be appealed to on moral grounds alone, if at all. And so when we try to make moral arguments in our pursuit of justice and in our practice of politics, it tends to fall on deaf ears. On the left, it falls on ears that pretend to listen. On the right, it falls on deaf ears altogether, because nobody else is concerned with morality but us. When it comes to justice, we're going to have to look to economic means and economic platforms, and I think that's the first matter of business.
All right, Daniel.
I love the fact that you set it up that way, because that is actually where I first started, right? Often we keep looking at the lens of politics, and Bobby said it best in the first episode, where we have to fall in love with the candidates. So the note that I actually made was we have to look for mutual interests versus allies, because we keep, and this has popped up recently with this whole stimulus thing, how they just create trillions of dollars out of thin air. And so the comments have been, well, they can create trillions of dollars out of thin air for this, but they can't do it for reparations. And it really comes back to the fact that we're only 14% of the population. So looking for them to do what's right by us, making up that small a block is not necessarily the most effective. It's not going to be the most effective approach. So one of the notes I made was mutual interest over allies, because I don't believe that we always have to look for people who are 100% aligned with where we're trying to go. But I do believe that it has to be a creation of shared ideals that can get us further along the path. So one of the things I was looking at were worker-owned co-ops as a standard practice that we kind of started looking at, right? Businesses and smaller businesses that group together to have greater bargaining power that can actually grow within the confines of the community, keep more of what we create and what we earn in our communities, use that as a way to kind of grow our economic leverage, and then look for mutual interest to advance our aims.
Awesome. Love that. Bobby the boss.
So I think I'm on the same page with the others as well. I definitely am in alignment with what Ivo suggested before. Basically, taking the kid gloves off. We have to understand that at this stage in the game, we are coming into this late at a disadvantage, at a severe handicap. In addition to that, it's not a result of us not playing fair. It's not a result of us not being capable or being inept. It's a result of us being handicapped and crippled. So at that point, all bets should be off. There should be no level that is not considered, at least by us, when it comes to how we're going to get ourselves back in a position. Funny enough, I was reading over the weekend, I was going over, I believe, a lecture from Dr. Amos Wilson, and he was speaking historically about the things that have taken place that have allowed us to get to where things are. And I can't remember exactly what it was. I knew I should have highlighted it. I know I should have bookmarked that session just to go over it again. But he basically said more or less that when it comes to comparing white people, the European today to the European of back in those days, and the beginnings of chattel slavery and how this whole platform was set up, he said that it's not that we have nicer white people today. It's simply that they got to a point where they don't have to be as brutal anymore. They have everything set in place to where they like it, and everything's autopilot. So they don't have to be as overtly brutal or as dastardly as they did back then. They can simply, and we see that today, where oftentimes they take a hands-off approach where they say, well, I wasn't alive when this happened, or I didn't do this. Why should I have to pay the price? Well, it's because your forebears paved the way for you, and now you simply have the luxury of just enjoying the ride and cruise control. So therefore, I believe that it stands to reason that if we're going to catch up for the lost ground, we're also going to take similar measures, and we need to understand that as long as this furthers us towards our goal, it might not be nice, it might not be pretty, but eventually we can move the ball further enough where our children too can say, well, we didn't do that, or that was back then, that's not on us.
All right. Very nice. Penny.
So it's funny that you brought up the civil rights movement in my empty flights that I've been working and flying in my commuting. I was actually on YouTube. I downloaded all the episodes of the Eyes on the Prize documentary, a very good documentary, and I've been watching it. And it's funny. Ivo said that we need to approach it from an economic standpoint. So I had this radical idea, right? We're not fond of local police departments and their monopolizing of city budgets, right? A lot of cities spend upwards of between, I think the low end I've seen, 40% of city budgets are spent on police and fire, upwards of 60% of city budgets, over half of city budgets are spent on police and fire. And so I had this radical idea, right? So during the movement, they recognized that, if you hurt pockets, things begin to change. And it also reminded me of the quote from the movie Changing Places, where Eddie Murphy said, it seems like the way you hurt white people is you take all their money. But in any event, so I had this crazy idea. And I thought that something that a lot of people could get behind, it wouldn't just be blacks per se, and I don't know if it would work, but it was a radical idea. So if we can go 30 days by drowning starving the city coffers by just simply obeying the speed limit. When I was working on the Milwaukee city budget, I looked at the literally millions of dollars that they plan. The actuaries actually figure out how much money that they're going to take in on the speeding tickets. And I thought about that. If we took that revenue away, right, that would force them away from traffic enforcement and force them into actually dealing with some of the issues that are in the community. Malcolm X said it, famously. He said there has to be something wrong. I'm paraphrasing here. Said something along the lines of, has to be something wrong with the fact that the most police are in the urban communities, but that's also where the most crime is. Doesn't make any sense. They're not solving crimes, so they must be a part of the problem. And so that was just a radical idea that I thought that if we starved at least the traffic enforcement part of policing, and force them to redirect their resources elsewhere, maybe we can get them into actually doing their jobs. Because I'm a firm believer that if police did their jobs, you could bring down, especially violent crime, down exponentially. But that would require everyone being on the same page.
I think that would be an excellent part of a local agenda. And that's part of the problem with Black politics in general. We have romanticized American politics, our place in it, and we tend to start from the top down instead of starting from the bottom up. I believe we all are in agreement here that local politics are much more important for Black voters to be focused on right now than federal. And so in attempting to comprise a national Black agenda, we really don't have any data to work with until there are local Black agendas to speak of. And part of a local Black agenda, an amazing part, I think, would be reducing the amount of money that is spent on fire and police in conjunction with more awareness of zoning laws, getting local voters, just Black voters, because that's who I'm concerned with, getting Black voters voting on local issues pertaining to business activity and school activity in the areas where we live. Most of the elections that Black people don't care about, the ones that we think aren't that important because it's not the big one. So we have a lot of work to do with respect to changing the way people look at local politics. But if we can do that and reduce costs, we can prove viability and just become more of a force, but it has to start on the local level. And that seems to be problematic because our entire concept of political activity seems to, by and large, be national. Like we think of the civil rights movement when we think of the Black vote and Black voter power. So what suggestions do my fellow panelists have for increasing awareness for local politics and the importance of participation in local politics?
That's a good one. I hate, Ivo, you know how I feel about, y'all all should know how I feel about national politics. I hate it. National politics to me is the Instagram. Local politics is the college educated woman that doesn't show her behind. So that's how I look. Which one gets more attention? Which one gets more attention? The Instagram model is going to get more attention, right? Because she has 1 million followers on Instagram. And I've struggled with that for a long time. But it seems that one of the reasons that the civil rights movement had the captive audience is because most people went to church. And, all it took was a handful of pastors to kind of get together and kind of streamline the message. I think that could still work. Now, mind you, it wouldn't have to be a moral message, but certainly a lot of the larger churches have the ear of a lot of people, and that's just
you see what that face, Penny?
Huh?
You see the Queen face?
I saw the Queen's face. I'm not saying lead with a moral argument, but you have a captive audience right there.
A large audience, yes. But we are now in the technology age where we're not dependent upon our church leaders for vital information on local politics or what's going on in the world today. Like my mother still calls the news, and I have to remind her there's so many different options for news, Mom. It's no longer the news. So the pastor is no longer the source of the news. So yeah, people are still going to church, they're still attending church. But do pastors really have the ear of the people when it comes to political issues, like they did during the civil rights movement?
I'm not saying it's to that level. I'm just naming one avenue in which you have, they're the people. Because during my days in Milwaukee and Chicago, I mean, when they have their political panels, you'd have a bunch of people, you'd have a packed house.
That's true, but the population on Sunday morning versus the number of people who attend the political roundtable discussions, there's a difference.
Well, yeah.
So I'll say this
on Facebook, because that's where people are really paying attention, not the pulpit. Facebook.
All right, so Daniel. Daniel, hold that real quick, and don't forget, hold that real quick. Just wanted to take a time for those who may have just popped in. I'm George Middleton, your host for Black Space Live, and the topic we're discussing is the third part of our collective political power assessment, and we're brainstorming to arrive at the top 3 strategies politically that we have not tried yet to move our community significantly forward. And we've had a roundtable of all of our esteemed panelists give their views on strategies or tactics or techniques that we have not tried yet. Ivo, and I'm going to ask her to expound on this here shortly, recommends pushing our political agenda from an economic perspective over a morality perspective. Daniel says, look for mutual interests over allies. I like the sound of that. Look for mutual interests over allies. That's very strategically based. Bobby the boss, he's ready to get in the ring and mix it up. He says, look, it's time to take off the kid gloves. All bets are off when you're dealing with me. That's almost a Malcolm X's any means necessary type of tone, which I'm definitely feeling that. And then all world is talking about stop being pawns for the systems. So he used the example about how state to state, every police department, they get their quota off of our community. And traffic stops are the number one reasons that police officers look for us. They're looking for infractions on your lights, your license plate. It's those little things that we don't pay attention to that they know and they capitalize on. So, and I really love that because it starts to put personal responsibility on what we can do to change the game. And then I'm going to add one. It may not make initial sense, but I'm going to add it in there, drop it, let it marinate, and we'll come back to that. I think a strategy that we have yet to try is to mentally play outside of the race box. So just kind of let that sit on you for a minute while we discuss this. Daniel, you had some additional perspective to go with what the Queen said.
Yeah. I was actually going to go to the other side of the moral spectrum from where Penny went. So I actually feel that there is a role in looking at how other marginalized communities made progress to legitimacy. They actually incorporated their criminal element in order to do so. So there has to be a way that we organize, and yes, I did say organize the criminal element to now make that transition from where they're illegitimate to being legitimate enterprises that actually have a level of power.
So you want us to call Nino Brown and them?
Pardon me?
Well, to be
You want us to
fair,
call Nino Brown and them?
to be
Why
fair,
not?
Daniel has a point. I don't think we can really fashion our strategy after anyone else's because our circumstances are so unique. But if we're going to examine other marginalized groups and how they approach the come up, the religious community, the organized crime community, the political community, they tend to have ties. They have ties. I'm not saying that's the route we want to take.
Correct. Right.
But the criminal underworld, they tend to have a seat at the table when the table is being set.
And to be honest, we always overlook that, right? When we look at Asian cultures, and we overlook the fact that, let's be honest, in a lot of our major cities, they have a significant criminal element to where they actually self-police, right? You don't have someone from outside of the community that comes into their community to police. A lot of their policing is done internally, and only when there's something above and outside of the realm of what is acceptable will they allow someone from the outside to come in. So it's almost around the Black Panther kind of concept, but that's something we've done before, which is we've self-policed, right?
Do we really have a competent Black mafia, though? Because that's what we're talking about here.
That is.
Unfortunately.
We don't have that.
But I don't know if we have a competent Black mafia element where we can really do this. I mean, it's nice to entertain and to acknowledge, yes, the criminal element does play their role. But honestly, have you seen it in the Black community? Most of us are hustling backwards. I mean, can we really afford to include our criminal element at the table when it's time to like make place settings at the table? Do they really do well enough? The question
is, can we afford not to?
Is the Black criminal community really pulling their weight here? Because I'm not sure they really earned a seat at the table.
As it is, no. I think what happens is, and if we look at it from that perspective where we take our criminal element and we look at it not as just some nuisance, but as a necessary and vital part of the overall component of Black society, then I think it would stand to reason that the criminal element needs an overhaul as well. So we might need to have a renaissance. We might need to have a birth of the new age Black gangster. What does that look like? What does the Black criminal look like? So so much like the Italian mafia, much like the Yakuza and the other organized crime elements, we level up. We go from the sagging pants to now we go to the business suits. We go from the gold teeth to now we go to the Emporio Armani briefcases. And now we go from being less in the streets, less doing the nickel and diamond on the corner. Now we go to more highbrow crime. So maybe some more internet fraud, maybe producing false cards, whatever it is. Maybe getting into the identity stuff. Because there are smarter, and I'm actually thinking now, there was an episode of Vice TV, I can't recall what the show was, but they actually went undercover into this this operation of this guy up, and I think it was DC, it could be him in Baltimore, I think it was somewhere in the tri-state area, but they went to this young guy, he's probably about maybe 28, 29 years old with a voice altering, and pretty much he was showing his whole operation, how he was making phony dummy credit cards.
Yep.
And he was showing all the money that he was raking in. He literally had, it looked like a real life rap video. I half expected to see Rick Ross come through on little mini bike yelling Maybach music. He literally had money on the floor, like stacks of stacks. And he was saying that he'd made more money doing that in just 1 week than some drug operations could probably see in maybe a month or so. And he was talking about the best part about it is there's so much of it going on, it's almost impossible to just focus and target in any one person. So it's a very high risk, it's very high reward, medium risk. And that's what you look for when you're doing any sort of business opportunity. So there are much better and smarter and more effective and efficient ways to get this paper than moving dimes and nicks on the corner or
So
out the back.
basically, our criminal element is underperforming as well, and
That is
everybody
true.
needs to
Woefully.
step it up.
I'd also say
would
by
have to
design
help
as
them
well.
level up as well.
We're seriously
That's
having a
saying a
discussion.
lot.
We're seriously having a discussion about making our criminals better.
That's
My
saying a
brother,
lot, though. If we are,
desperate
look,
times call for
honestly, we
desperate
are the
measures.
only group in America that started out with negative net worth. So even our criminal element is starting from behind. Like, we all have to step it up. Every segment of Black society has work
Has
to do.
level up.
Even
We
the
all have a
thug,
part to
like,
play.
thug a little harder.
But think about it, right? So to Bobby's point, if you level up the criminals from where they're doing violent level crimes to where the crimes are more white collar, you also lower the violence in the community. And I was doing the research a couple of years ago. We have communities, like there are communities in Brooklyn where their number one source of public investment was putting young men into prison. And they literally called them $1 million blocks because so many young men left the blocks and went to prisons in largely rural areas where they get counted towards that population for that area for representation and taxation purposes, but they don't get any of the benefits of the dollars that come into that area. So they literally had $1 million zip codes that were sending multi-million dollars worth of convicts or individuals that were convicted of crimes to these other rural areas, and the transfer of wealth left our neighborhood and went to their.
So that's the hood's main export, is bodies.
That in our culture, and unfortunately, largely our culture is represented by that mindset.
So I've been watching all week. I've been what am I trying to say the word? When you're watching a series, yeah, I've been binge watching Godfather of Harlem with
Thank you for reminding me. I appreciate you.
So every one of you are hitting on those themes. And what's interesting about Godfather of Harlem is that everything you guys said, it displays in this series, the connection between the church, politics, and the criminal element. And this idea of organizing your thugdom. There's a scene where Forrest is talking to Malcolm, and he's saying the reason why the Italians are so effective is because they're organized. Yes. They got capos, they got a hierarchy, they got rules, right? Within that, there was no concern of the morality of the discussion, only the effectiveness of the discussion. So this is brainstorming, and we're not judging anything right now. We're putting everything on the table because that's what you do. You know, from a therapeutic standpoint, when I'm not dealing with my clients, I try to get them to stop talking in morality or judgment terms and only talk in terms of effectiveness. Then after you have determined the effectiveness, then you can go back and get your moral template and see if it aligns with those decisions of effectiveness. And I liken it to those old common sense folks that never graduated from high school or went to college. My dad being one, but is immensely successful in his life. And he would always say, never make a decision in emotion.
I love that answer.
Never make a decision in emotion. Always use your head. And, you know, the older I get, the more smarter he gets. So, yeah. So I think we should definitely drill down into that. I like to go back with, and again, let me take a quick little break just to say this is Black Space Live. I'm George Middleton. For those who may have just popped in, the topic today is third part of the Collective Political Power Assessment Series. And today we're having a solutions-oriented discussion to trying to determine top 3 political strategies that we have yet to try as a community. So I want to go back to, I ain't going back with you no more, Ivo, and I would like you to give us a little more meat on how this looks pushing a political agenda from an economic perspective. What are some things that demonstrate that we could try?
Okay, pushing a political agenda from an economic perspective starts with the business community. I believe that one thing that Black voters have not necessarily tried before, if we have, it's been a very long time, is merging the business community and the political community. Our politicians tend to be philosophical in their focus and not economic. And as we see now, if we've never seen it before, if we've never discerned it before, the COVID-19 outbreak and the way different states are dealing with it has made it abundantly clear that politicians respond to the business community. States that are opening or reopening way too soon, that seem to be ignoring issues of public health, are doing so because they're paying attention to issues of local economy. They're not just crazy. Their business community is pushing back, and they have to do something because that's what politicians respond to. All this time, we've been making moral appeals instead of economic appeals, but who makes the economic appeals? The business community. Well, we don't trust the business community. Why? Because our local business communities usually don't look like us. Those of us who are doing business, who are focused on business, we need to be looking at our political activity and our awareness and involvement and seeing how much we can afford to add to what we're doing with a focus on politics, because that's where our power really lies. And those of us who are focused on politics, I believe, should be making inroads with Black people in the business community, because those are the voices that are heard. Those are the squeaky wheels that get the oil, the ones that control the money.
How do you separate them from their partisan ties, though? How would you go about doing that? I think, Bobby, you're the one that said, or no, was it Daniel that said we need to have shared interests?
Yes.
So my
So
question, go ahead.
I want to let you finish the question before I start answering half a question.
Okay. So that's my question. So if we were to focus on the business, and I see where you're going, Ivo, and I totally agree. But if you were to even locally, most businesses that are, invested politically are tied in a partisan manner. So for example, if Bobby Drake runs, grocery stores in a certain community, he can't openly support a candidate that is counter to the way his community votes, because he still needs to make a dollar. And in this hyper-partisan era, depending on what community you is, a MAGA hat will, it'll lose your money, or vice versa.
So I want to answer that because I have a note down here that says political bloc identity, PAC, create an agenda, put dollars behind it. I would love to see us get away from a partisan identity once we've identified what our needs are and what our agenda is. Because what I've noticed is we went from one party to another party, and they both one takes us for granted. The other one has pretty much decided that their best strategy is to get us not to vote at all, right? So one just takes our votes for granted. One has said, we'd rather make it difficult for you to exercise that right to vote. And really, the two parties have really just flip-flopped on that entire approach. But there needs to be something where we're saying, once again, shared interest, not allies, because when you look to someone to be an ally, that's an emotional. And so I actually wrote down what you said, George, about never make a decision in emotion. Our political decisions tend to be rooted in emotionalism, right? We don't like this candidate, therefore we're going to sit back and stay home. We don't speak about, and if we don't like them at the top, we don't participate in any level of the discussion between local all the way up to the top, not realizing that local impacts state, which then impacts national, which I know Penny's been a huge advocate and been screaming that from the top of the roofs for as long as I've been interacting with Penny. There needs to be we need to define what it is, what our 3 top asks are. Make sure everyone had an opportunity to comment and add their input. These are the things that we're working towards. Which party gives us the best chance to do that? So once you move around a strategy and an agenda, it's a very different move than moving from a partisan lens.
Love it, man. This conversation is very, very therapeutic for me because the creative process just coming out of the blue, you never know what's going to stick. Very cool. Let's move to Bobby the Boss. Bobby, I really love the emotion. I think the last in part 2, I had come up with a term about organic something. I can't remember what that was. We have to be organic about our mission. We don't, it seems like we don't have the juice. We always have to wait for some spark to get us angry before we really bring it in. And Bobby the Boss is like, hey, you know what? You don't have to give me a reason. I'm ready to go. And I think, just from a contextual historic piece, certain cultural groups, and I'm trying to be politically correct here, are very good at taking their animals and breeding them for the purposes that they need specifically. You want to win a Kentucky Derby, they can go and combine chemical hormones and give you that power horse. If you're a dog fighter, any type of animal competition, they know how to breed dogs to get specifically the type of beast that they want. Don't think for a second that when we were legally not human, that those strategies were not a part of our generational history. And one of the primary components that they bred their workers out of was aggressiveness. They wanted you big and strong, but mentally docile. So that's why I really relate strongly to Bobby's perspective here. So Bobby, would you just kind of put some meat on that bone and tell us what that looks like to you?
Well, to me, it looks a lot like what you were referring to previously about taking emotions, taking morality out of it. Typically one of the traits of not so much sociopaths, but psychopaths, one of the things that pertain to them, one of the traits that are very positive about them is because psychopaths tend to not have that level of morality factor. They don't have that check and balance that says this isn't right, this isn't proper. They simply have a mental or mindset of what is in my best interest. Psychopaths and also some sociopaths as well tend to be very high performers. I recall reading an article in Psychology Today, I think it was from their 2013 or 2014 editions, where they actually interviewed this woman who, of course, for obvious reasons, she was speaking anonymously, but she herself had been clinically diagnosed, I believe, as a sociopath. And as you would expect, she was a very high-performing person. She was, I believe, if she wasn't the CEO, she was one of the upper-level managers of a very high-performing company. And she was kind of just talking about her life and some of the challenges that she faced, where she didn't think of herself as a bad person. She didn't try to be this person, but she had some serious issues when it came to boundaries and what was okay and what wasn't okay. But she also expressed that it was because of this that she was able to better advance. She didn't necessarily care about who she had to walk over in order to get certain promotions. She wasn't the least bit concerned about whether this other person might have needed the job more because they had a family to take care of or they were in dire financial straits. She wanted it. She went for it. Whatever it took, she would do it so long as it didn't pose too much of a risk to herself. And as a result, she got to where she did. As I said prior, we are starting at negative. We're not even in the zero. We're not even, it's not even a zero sum game. We are at a profound deficit. And we're against a group of people who have a significant head start on us. The good news, however, is that because we do still have this African spirit of creativity, of perseverance, of endurance, of tenacity, of brilliance, of genius, we can overcome the deficit. It's not a foregone conclusion. We can win. We can come out on top. However, if we don't get started and we don't start taking the strides necessary, that's not going to happen. And I fear that it might, in some cases, be a little late for us. Uh, Looking at this pandemic that we're currently in the midst of now, I do believe I mentioned last time we spoke that the Chinese word or the symbols for uh, uh, chaos or catastrophe is danger, but also opportunity. One of the issues that has been plaguing the European diaspora for quite some time now is they're currently in a state of population decline. Presently, they are not reproducing as fast, they're dying out. So in many countries, they've resorted now to policies where they actually incentivize childbirthing, where if you're in a family and you're able to produce 3 or 4 children, I believe it's in Italy, they will actually give you free land, or they will create tax incentives where they'll actually give you money, or they'll limit the amount of tax they take off you so long as you're producing more heirs, because they recognize that they're in a state of global decline. And because this pandemic we're currently under, unfortunately, has ravaged primarily the elderly, people who are genetic or who have health concerns, there are a lot of older generational people who are out, who are no longer with us anymore. The next 30 to 40 years is going to look very different because we're going to see a whole generation that is removed from the planet a lot sooner than anticipated. That is sad and that is tragic. However, there is opportunity in that. So while we have this state of disarray, we need to be really marshaling ourselves together. We need to come up with some aggressive strategies. We need to look at doing things like possibly enhancing our criminal class, see if we can find ways to bring our undesirables to the table and say, what can we do to better improve you and as a whole better improve us? You have individuals who've made strategies or who made these sort of attempts in the past, not at this wide stage. Tupac Shakur, before he passed, he was actively successful in bringing the Bloods and Crips in the California area and some areas to an actual truce where they actually had rules of conduct that they abided by. You're not allowed to deal drugs or commit certain acts in certain areas. There were times when you could and couldn't conduct business. They had gangster rules, more or less. You had individuals like Nipsey Hussle, who was working to legitimize brands like the Crips. They were following I believe it was the Hells Angels, who are a notorious white biker gang, but they've actually incorporated themselves and they actually make money off of their logo, off their branding. And they're trying to move towards that. Killer Mike has also taken steps as well, where they have legitimized some business enterprises by the Crips and other gangs. So it can be done, and there's some who are open to that sort of thing. However, when we find ways to minimize the damage that we're taking, but also find ways to also enhance their business, saying, okay, we get it, this is how you make your money. Is there any way that you can do this in a way that is not going to directly or not as negatively adversely affect our communities? How can we keep this on that side, but we're allowed to thrive over here? And in turn, we can scratch your back as well. Make these sort of quote unquote deals with the devil and understand that this is for a long-term purpose, not a short-term one.
Well, the answers to that are kind of simple. Any community that has a strong criminal element has a stronger religious element. For example, the Italians, we all know about the Italian mafia, but we also know adversely about traditional Italian views on Catholicism and their commitment to their faith, so to speak. So if our religious community is not stronger than our criminal community, that balance is really not possible. But even with respect to all of that, everybody coming up, doing their thing, we have to have some sort of national agenda, some sort of tie that binds us all together, and which comes first, the chicken or the egg, is kind of difficult. But at the very least, I believe we all agree that the way Black Americans deal with the justice system needs to change. Our relationship with the penal system as a whole just needs to change. What Penny brought up earlier about reducing the local budget by simply adhering to the traffic laws. Everybody pulling together on issues related to sentencing and prison and justice system reform. There are very few things all Black Americans can agree on right now. We've gone in different directions with regards to our faith, career. We don't all earn the same thing. We don't all live in the same area. We don't all have the same taste. We don't all worship the same God. But we all tend to lean toward wanting justice and reform when it comes to the justice system. So we can at least start there and then focus on our local agendas. And over time, in areas where the religious community is strong enough, maybe these deals with the devil that you're talking about, Bobby, make more sense in local economies. But there have to be, you know, balancing forces. Otherwise, we just become the criminal underclass of America, which is what white people think, a lot of white people think we are anyway, and certainly not what we need. But yeah, justice reform and some sort of national agenda starting somewhere. And that's the only thing I can think of where we can start where everyone agrees. Does anyone disagree or have any alternative thoughts?
It is something that I did think about is what would a Black Constitution look like? And what would the process of creating one look like?
So we got to put that on our list of, because we have not created a Black Constitution in our, that's totally brand new concept.
And so what would that identity look like when defined? And then what would it look like for us to say, okay, this is the experience we don't share, but now to accomplish this, let's localize our approach. And I think that would be the marriage between Ivo's approach and kind of where Penny likes to be, which is local, but it's difficult to do a bunch of different local things that don't connect to a larger strategy that pulls it all together, because you get disjointed results.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have a question, and I'm kind of thinking about how, and I'm referencing the civil rights movement. So one way that, George, you posed a question earlier about not thinking, how'd you put it about thinking Black?
About mentally playing outside of the race box.
So on that note, one way that during the civil rights movement, they were able to they got support from a lot of white clergy, a lot of white people that were sympathetic to the cause, right? And that expanded their base, so to speak, right? And I get it that we're at the bottom of the totem pole, you know, the criminal justice system is unjust to us disproportionately to, you know, every other segment of America, right? But poor whites they suffer as well, right?
Yes.
Right. And so couldn't we put together, especially in talking about criminal justice, couldn't we put together a agenda or a constitution, right, that involved criminal justice that didn't say Black, but also address their issues, right? Because there's two groups that are beginning to become incarcerated at high rates. Women are becoming at a ridiculously high rate now. In fact, their incarceration rates is like 3 or 4 times that of men, right? Even though men outnumber them, but in terms of rates. And then like the poor white meth heads in Appalachia, right? Again, it's not to the same level that it is Black.
Disproportionate.
Right, it's right. But that is a message that would definitely resonate in that community, right?
So,
Baby, I'm tired of poor white crackheads co-opting my stuff. I'm tired of white people co-opting my stuff. I'm Black, I'm a woman. They co-opt everything I got. I'm tired. I need something to just be mine.
But if we're trying
meth heads, they got to get that. The white meth heads got to get their own movement because we're not doing meth. We don't have the meth lab. That's not us.
I know we're not.
No.
But if we want to build a coalition,
really
right?
quick, to compromise and take both of your points to what Penny was saying, I think we keep it as internally, right? Internally, it is a Black Constitution.
Right.
That's the strategy, the overarching strategy.
We tired of taking in strays. Black women been taking in strays all this time. And nobody seems to care or remember us when it's time for Black women to be remembered. The Black women's vote is now. Get your own thing. But
Ivo, let me challenge you for a moment, right? Let me challenge you for a moment, right? This is something that I learned from a psychologist, right? There's a world of should, and then there's a world of is, right? We should be able to put forth our own agenda and move it forward, right? But the reality is, and I'm kind of remembering the Eyes on the Prize. I forget who gave a very moving speech about they didn't care about they didn't care about all these Black bodies being killed, but the minute a white clergyman went down, all of a sudden they cared, right? And things begin to happen, right? And so again, I'm not in the world of should. We should be able to do things on our own, right? But the reality is, in the world of is, if we were to bring them aboard, right, just on criminal justice, we may get somewhere.
Shared interest over ally.
They not loyal though. They not loyal. As soon as they get what they want, as soon as they get a little bit of leverage, they'll be back with the white man, ready to put a bullet in your brain, like they wasn't just marching with you last week. Soon as they get sobered up, they back to being white. It's not that I don't understand and agree with what you're saying technically, but socially, people are willing to leave us high and dry. They will ride our train and overtly use us and our issues to get what they need. And as soon as they get what they need, it's over, go back to being white and flip-flop like nothing's wrong. And the white folks just take them back like they never left. It's crazy. And we just are out here behinds flapping in the wind every time. And because of that, I'm still standing strong on my no because they not loyal. They not
the
loyal.
issue with
we don't need them to be loyal.
coalitions, but
We just need them to be
loyal.
but see, the issue with coalitions is that coalitions can be very powerful. They can get a lot done. They can put a lot of manpower, a lot of hands on the wheels to really drive things.
The crackhead coalition, I don't know if they have enough leverage for us to
my dear, have you seen how strong crackheads are? Have you seen how powerful they are?
I don't know if they have
mountains for that dime bag.
leverage for us. We're too good for y'all.
Let's do this.
I would say this.
Coalitions there, you have to be able to hold people accountable. That's the whole issue. We have, as Black people, we don't have any power whatsoever to hold other white people accountable. So we can invite them to the table. We can say, okay, this is gonna be quid pro quo. I get something out of it. You get something out of it. And if they decide that they want to go ahead and violate the confines we construct, there's nothing that we can do to hold them accountable. However, if we were to go back on them, they do have outlets. They do have ways where they can go ahead and punish us for not complying. And that's the issue. Those situations work well when there's equal power, when we each have mutual assured destruction. I have a thumb on the big red button, you have a thumb on the big red button. And if you move wrong, I can blow you sky high. I move wrong, you can blow me sky high. As long as we don't have that in place, it's not going to work. Case in point, we're talking about the opioid epidemic that white people are currently suffering under. Even at their worst, they still benefit from sticking with themselves. When we had the crack cocaine epidemic, we got the war on drugs, we got mass incarceration, we got 3 strikes, no mercy whatsoever. We have the opioid epidemic now. They have policies set in place where if you make a phone call because someone is having an overdose, no one at the scene will be arrested because they want to prioritize saving lives. So because we don't want you to be too afraid of getting in trouble for using drugs illegally, if there's an overdose and you report it, we will just treat the person or the persons and allow you to walk away scot-free. So even when they're at the bottom of the mud, they still are better off with themselves than they are with us. So we got to get some power first before we can make those kind of moves.
Right, and this issue that you're discussing, that kind of really triggered Ivo. I can feel her passion. That gets into my suggestion, but since we're kind of running to the end of time, we're going to pick back up on all these things. And the next show that we do is going to summarize the first three parts to make sure that we have actually achieved the mission of these first three parts in this. Probably the more you guys talk, the more parts end up coming on this.
It's a 10-part series.
Right.
Mini series.
The first dance.
This will take us into year 2050.
Hey, look. Well, just so you know, by 2053, black wealth is forecasted to drop all the way to $0.
Zero.
This discussion, Ivo, I am 100% behind you. It has to be economic at the root of everything, and then build all of the other facets on top of that.
And
oh, black wealth is late. Mine already dropped to $0.
You can't see my brand, but I am a brother of broke, five broke. We ain't got
it. And so this is what I want to expound in the upcoming series, so that we are not getting triggered by this color thing. Because what happens is when you get triggered, you're moving from the reasoning side to the emotion side. But not that the emotions are not correct or valid, but they may not be effective during a time to be strategic. So we want to come. What I want to do is just take maybe 15 to 20 seconds, and as we get ready to close this up, let everybody kind of just give it a closer. If you want to do a power quote or something that you got to leave everybody on a motivated note for series number 4. We'll start with the queen. That's always love, have beauty and brains first.
You can't go wrong.
Thank you so much, George. I don't have any power quotes this evening. Just let's refocus to economic standpoints, mindsets, because the moral argument is falling on deaf ears.
Love it. Danny, I'm gonna tell you like it is, Williams.
I know that we were discussing politics today, and the discussion is largely centered around political power. But I will say this, the paradigm has to continue to be family, community, and nation. If we can fix our families, we can fix our communities. If we fix our communities, we can fix our collective. I guess it'll be family, community, collective going forward. And I think one of the number one things that we can do to resolve probably 75% of our challenges is marry the woman you have kids
with. Okay, that's yes, drop the mic.
I'll leave that statement as it is.
Bobby, the boss.
So my power thought, as you refer to it, is going to be a bit of a recommendation. So no matter what I say, ultimately, my primary focus or my key hot point is always going to be from the perspective of economics. And although our situations are somewhat different, I like to point to our friendly neighbors, wink, wink, the Jewish community. There is a book that is published, that was written by a man named Gordon Thomas called Gideon's Spies, The Secret History of the Mossad. In this book, it is somewhat of a loosely, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the things in there are probably stranger than fiction, but it's loosely documenting the rise to power of Israel. And one of the interesting key elements is that when we talk about how do you establish power, how does a people come into being established, the source of their comeuppance was actually through their business class. It was their businessmen, the entrepreneurs, that laid the foundation. They were active in politics. They were active in espionage. They were active in information gathering. It was literally the business class that were the bricks and mortars and the foundation of how they came into being this outcasted people into those well into those who have an established home state and now wields supreme influence around the world. Gideon Spies by Gordon Thomas. Pick it up.
Love it. Love it. Penny Allworld Finley.
Really am I at a loss of words because I love to talk. I don't have any powerful words either. Nothing along the subject. Given the pandemic, I challenge everyone. I challenge our leadership. I know that everybody's, on the it's not real side or it's, or it's too real side. I look to our leadership to give a calming voice. And so I'll give some calming, if you guys don't mind, some calming advice. I look at this situation, how everyone's ready to get the economy. Everyone's worried about money, worried about money. I have some patriotism in me. I live in a country that, survived the Civil War, right? We survived Jim Crow, right? We survived the Great Depression. We helped defeat fascism globally, right? We did all these things, right? And so our economy, I'm confident that our economy will bounce back. And this reminds me of, was it Abraham, for the Christians on the panel, was it Abraham that was pleading with God about if there's 50 in the city, will you spare us? What about 10? And so I ask people, if we can save, if you don't believe the 50,000 number, what if it's 20,000? What if it's 1,000? Is staying at home worth saving 1,000? And so I challenge them with that. And those are my words of encouragement, or my final words.
Here. Well done. Yeah, because this is a very trying time, and we really need to. Yes, very trying time for everybody. Well, I think this process, what I like to leave everybody with is take note. Whoever's watching this, take note. Look at the process. This, for me, feels great. We're acknowledging issues, but we're also empowering ourselves. I mean, I heard some really great intellectual power here today that we can really build on. And look who's on the screen. It can be done. To borrow off what Bobby the Boss says, we can win. Because, we know how to come from behind in the last 5 minutes. We know how to do that. So we can win. So I just love that he said that. So on that, I think this quote really aptly aligns with the theme of the way this discussion went today. And I want to leave you with a quote from R. Buckminster Fuller. He states, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." So this has been great, guys. You are awesome. I'm George Middleton. This has been Black Space Live. You have been entertained and informed and edutained by a powerfully esteemed panel. Ivo, I ain't going back and forth with you, Jackson. Danny, I'm going to tell you like it is, Williams, Bobby the Boss Drake, and Penny Allworld Finley. Guys, thank you very much. Stay tuned for part 4. Till then, stay safe, stay home, and we're going to get through this together. Thank you and good night.